There are places where beauty disguises the coming of ruin, places where the ocean glows like molten glass, and the air itself hums with a kind of fatal peace. In the late 1700s, that place was Tahiti, an island so lush, so alive, that sailors called it paradise. But paradise has a way of hiding the first sins. She was born Maimiti, daughter of a local chief, raised on songs of ancestors and the rhythm of tide and fire. Her world was made of color and ritual, woven mats, carved totems, the laughter of her people drifting over the waves. She knew nothing of empire, nothing of the steel and smoke that rode in with foreign ships. Then came the Bounty, a British vessel, scarred by months at sea and by men who no longer trusted their captain, William Bligh. Among them was a quiet soul, haunted and defiant, with eyes that carried more sorrow than rage, Fletcher Christian. When their eyes met, it was as if two storms recognized each other. He saw in her something pure, something untouched by the rot of the world he came from. She saw in him a sadness she couldn't name, and so began the quiet, fateful thread that would bind two worlds together and tear them both apart. At first it was whispers in the night, small gifts, secret meetings beneath the palms. He taught her words in a language that was all edges and guilt. She taught him how to listen to the earth, how to breathe again. But love, in such a place, is never simple. While the other sailors indulged in the illusion of Eden, Fletcher's heart turned inward, toward rebellion. His love for her was not enough to save him from the storm inside. When the mutiny came, when Fletcher turned his crew against Captain Bligh, Maimiti watched the world tilt on its axis. Her lover became a criminal, her island became his only refuge, and her heart became the price for his escape. History remembers the mutiny on the Bounty as a story of men, of power, of defiance. But behind every act of rebellion, there is always someone left behind, a woman whose world burns quietly in the background. For Maimiti, that fire would follow her all the way to Pitcairn Island, where innocence would give way to exile, and love would become a bloodline, one that still carries the echoes of that original sin. The descendants of Maimiti and Fletcher Christian still walk the earth today, their faces marked by both beauty and burden, a lineage born from defiance, trapped by isolation, and haunted by the choices of one man. So, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? From the hills of Appalachia, the valleys of West Virginia, or somewhere across the sea where old bloodlines still whisper through the generations? Subscribe and stay with us as we uncover the forgotten matriarch of a cursed paradise, and the dark inheritance she left behind. Love, when it comes in the shadow of rebellion, is never gentle. It burns. Quietly at first, then with the hunger of something that knows it cannot last. By the spring of 1789, the HMS Bounty drifted like a wounded beast through the Pacific, its decks heavy with anger. The men had grown hollow under Captain Bligh's tyranny. Endless punishments, no mercy, no rest. But beneath that rage, something else stirred, something softer, something that would outlive every mutiny and every death that followed. Her name was Maimiti, the island girl who had followed her lover, Fletcher Christian, into the dark. She was far from the scented gardens of Tahiti now, surrounded by the stink of pitch, gunpowder, and fear. Yet she stood tall among desperate men. Fletcher had promised her a new life, freedom, peace. But freedom, she would soon learn, is a kind of violence all its own. The nights grew long aboard the Bounty. Whispers crawled through the lower decks, of starvation, punishment, death. And in the captain's eyes, Fletcher saw the reflection of everything he despised in himself. Then came the morning when restraint broke. Bligh's voice rose like thunder, calling them cowards, calling Fletcher a traitor before the crime was even born. And with one trembling hand, Fletcher reached for his pistol. The ship erupted, men shouting, ropes snapping, years of humiliation bleeding out in an instant. Mutiny. The word carried like a curse across the sea. While the others bound the captain, Maimiti stood frozen on the deck, the salt wind clawing at her hair. She didn't understand the English words, but she understood the eyes, the faces of men who knew there was no turning back. They had defied the crown. They had doomed themselves. When the ship turned from Tahiti's golden shores, she looked back once, her home fading into mist. And beside her stood the man she loved, trembling not with triumph, but with terror. He told her they would find a place untouched by empire, an island where they could live as new people, free from the chains of England. But Maimiti saw the truth already. There is no paradise built on betrayal. There is only the long shadow of what you've done. As the Bounty sailed into oblivion, Fletcher's eyes grew darker each day. He would pace the deck at night, staring into the black horizon, whispering to ghosts that weren't there. And Maimiti would hold him, wordless, knowing love could no longer save what guilt had already taken. Their fate was sealed not by the mutiny itself, but by the belief that love could survive it. That same belief would lead them to the island of Pitcairn, where love, power, and blood would twist into one cursed inheritance, a lineage born of fire and fear. After the mutiny, the Bounty drifted through the Pacific like a ghost, cut off from country, faith, and God. The men who once called themselves sailors were now outlaws, hunted by the crown and haunted by their own fear. And in the quiet corners of that ship, Maimiti waited, the island girl who had followed love into exile. The horizon was endless now, no home behind them, no destination ahead, just a vast, rolling emptiness that mirrored the look in Fletcher Christian's eyes. He had freed himself from his captain, but not from his conscience. At night, when the others slept, he'd pace the deck like a man possessed, whispering to the sea, seeing faces in the waves. Maimiti would watch him from the shadows, her heart torn between love and dread. The man she followed was slipping into something she no longer recognized. The men grew restless. Their food rotted in the barrels. Their water turned brackish. Arguments became shoves. Shoves turned to knives. Each man began to realize what the silence meant. There was no plan, no direction, only running. They spoke of Tubuai, of Tahiti, of finding an island untouched by law. But every land they reached rejected them. Every shore felt cursed. And through it all, Maimiti stood by Fletcher's side, clutching the child growing inside her. Love had carried her this far. But now, love began to feel like a sentence. The ocean became their prison, the waves their walls. The ship's timbers groaned under the weight of secrets and fear. Men drank salt water, tore at each other in fits of rage, praying for a storm that might end it all. And yet, through that chaos, Fletcher kept searching, not for a home, but for redemption. He told Maimiti that somewhere, far beyond the maps, there was a place no empire could touch, a place where they could live free, where no one would judge their love or the blood on his hands. But Maimiti had begun to understand something he could not. You can flee from a captain. You can burn a ship, but you cannot escape the curse that sails with you. One night, as the moon bled through the clouds, she found him on the deck, staring at the stars. He said, "If I die out here, at least no man will find me." She said nothing, only placed his trembling hand on her belly, the faint kick of life beneath his palm. That was all they had left, a child, and the fading belief that it might be born into something better. Within weeks they would find it, a speck of rock rising from the endless blue, a place called Pitcairn Island, remote, volcanic, forgotten, the perfect hiding place for a doomed love and the bloodline it would create. Sometimes the road to paradise begins with running and ends with nowhere left to go. The ship that once carried them, the HMS Bounty, had become a floating confession. Every creak of her timbers whispered the memory of rebellion, of the captain cast adrift, of a world left burning behind them. And for Fletcher Christian, there could be no forgiveness, not from God, not from England, not even from himself. When they found Pitcairn Island, it was as if the sea itself had offered them a grave disguised as paradise. A black-toothed rock rising from the endless blue, unmarked on most maps, hidden by storms and luck. To Fletcher, it looked like salvation. To Maimiti, it looked like the end of the world. The settlers came ashore, 6 mutineers, 12 Tahitian women, a handful of men whose names would fade into legend. They built huts from palm wood, planted yam and breadfruit, and told themselves this was a new beginning. But the island was small, and secrets have no place to hide in small worlds. Maimiti watched her husband grow thinner by the day. He walked the cliffs alone, staring at the ship that had brought them here, the last thread tying them to the sins of the past. At night, He would wake in sweats, mumbling the name Bly like a curse and a prayer. She could see it in his eyes. To find peace, the Bounty had to die. So, one evening, as the sun fell blood-red behind the horizon, Fletcher gave the order. They carried torches to the shore, the flames trembling in the salt wind. The crew stood in silence as the fire took hold, spreading from sail to mast, from deck to hull, until the night glowed orange over the water. The Bounty burned like an offering to the gods of guilt. Maimiti stood beside him, her child clutched to her chest, the heat of the blaze washing over her skin. In that moment, she knew. There was no going back. Every name, every memory, every map that could lead them home was turning to ash before her eyes. The ocean would close over the wreck, and history would forget them. But some fires do not purify. They curse. The men grew restless, the Tahitian husbands bitter. The women whispered that Fletcher's flame had summoned darkness to the island. And in the silence that followed the burning, something began to unravel. The fragile peace, the fragile minds, the fragile love that once tethered Maimiti to him. By morning, only smoke remained, a thin gray column rising from the sea, like a soul unwilling to leave. The island was theirs now, and so was the isolation. Fletcher called it freedom, Maimiti called it exile, and the world would one day call it the birth of a bloodline, one that still carries her name through generations of love, madness, and ruin. At first, the island had seemed like paradise, a place where the waves whispered forgiveness and the fruit fell from trees as if heaven had finally opened its hand. But time has a way of showing its teeth. The men who had followed Fletcher Christian to this lost corner of the Pacific soon discovered that Eden is not a place. It's a lie we tell ourselves when we're desperate for redemption. And as months turned to years, the lie began to rot. The Bounty had burned to ash, but the sins that birthed the mutiny still breathed, in the heat, in the jealous glances, in the quiet resentments of a handful of men trapped on a rock. There were too few women, too much rum, and far too many ghosts. The Tahitian men, brought as servants, not equals, began to see the truth of their place. The mutineers claimed the best land, the most fertile soil, the women they desired. And Maimiti, she saw it all unravel. The laughter that once rose from the beach had turned to whispers in the night. Whispers of vengeance, of curses, of blood debts unpaid. Fletcher tried to hold the peace, but his authority, once feared aboard the Bounty, had dissolved into sand beneath his feet. He was a leader haunted by his own rebellion, a man who had turned against his captain only to become one himself, and feel the same knife twisting in his back. They said the first blood spilled on Pitcairn came from a fight over a coconut. But it was never about the fruit. It was about pride, about ownership, about who truly ruled the island. One night, the shouting began, sharp, inhuman, full of rage and old pain. By dawn, one man lay dead in the sand, his blood sinking into the same ground where they had once planted hope. And that was the beginning. From then on, the paradise Fletcher had promised became a living purgatory. The women mourned in silence. The men slept with knives by their beds. Each sunrise brought suspicion. Each meal carried the weight of unspoken hatred. And in the center of it all stood Maimiti, mother, wife, survivor, watching her small world turn to hell. Her husband's eyes had gone distant, haunted, broken by guilt and drink. He would wander the cliffs, talking to the wind, to the ghosts of men he'd betrayed and left adrift. Maimiti tried to hold what remained, the children, the faith, the fragile thread of sanity, but she knew the island was sinking, not into the sea, but into madness. When she looked out over the burning horizon, she didn't see the paradise they were promised. She saw a curse taking root, a bloodline born from sin, isolation, and the ashes of men who thought they could outrun God. And on that silence, a question lingers. If the price of freedom is peace, how much of your soul would you give to be forgiven? By the time Fletcher Christian met his end, the island had already begun to devour itself. What began as paradise, a promise of peace, had become a trap. Each sunrise brought whispers of betrayal, every shadow a threat. And in the middle of it all stood Maimiti, watching the man she loved dissolve into guilt and madness. He had once been the proud officer of the HMS Bounty. his voice able to command storms, his eyes sharp as steel. But now, on the cliffs of Pitcairn, he was a ghost long before he died. Some nights, she would find him sitting by the fire, staring into the embers, speaking softly to the sea as if it were an old friend he'd wronged. His mutiny, the rebellion that made him a legend, had become a curse that chained them all. The men no longer followed him. They were splintered, white against brown, lover against lover, brother against brother. The Tahitian men plotted revenge. The mutineers clung to power they no longer truly held. The air itself was thick with hatred, and Maimiti could feel it pressing against her chest, like the island itself wanted to swallow them whole. On the morning Fletcher died, the sky hung heavy, gray, swollen with rain. She remembers hearing a shout, sharp as a blade, from the edge of the clearing. Then chaos, running feet, gunfire echoing off the cliffs, and the unmistakable sound of her husband's voice, caught between anger and disbelief. When she reached him, he was already on the ground, his shirt dark with blood, the sea roaring far below as if it knew what it had reclaimed. No one knows who fired the shot that killed Fletcher Christian. Some say it was a Tahitian man seeking justice for the dead. Others whisper it was one of his own, a mutineer turned murderer, driven mad by fear and hunger. The truth died with him, carried away by the tide. That night, Maimiti washed his body in silence. There were no priests, no hymns, no England to send him home to. She buried him beneath the breadfruit trees, where the soil was soft and the wind never stopped. And as she pressed her hands into the dirt, she understood. This was not an ending, but the beginning of a bloodline born from sin and solitude. Her children would inherit more than his name. They would inherit the weight of what he'd done. The blood spilled on that island would echo through generations, from Pitcairn to Norfolk, from one cursed shore to another. And still she endured, a mother among ghosts, the keeper of a story no one else would tell. They say the sea remembers every secret it swallows. So, tell me, when you look out at the endless water, do you believe the dead can ever find? After Fletcher's death, the island fell silent. No singing, no laughter, just the sound of waves gnawing at the cliffs, like the sea itself was erasing his name. Maimiti stood barefoot in the soil of Pitcairn, the widow of a man both revered and damned, holding their children close, as if her touch alone could keep the ghosts away. The men buried him in shallow ground beneath the breadfruit trees, but no one dared mark the grave. They feared what would come if his spirit couldn't rest. And maybe they feared her too, because grief had made Maimiti something more than human. In her silence was a strength that frightened them, the quiet power of a woman who had loved, lost, and now saw through every lie the island whispered. In the months that followed, blood still spilled. One by one, the mutineers turned on each other, greed, jealousy, and guilt rotting whatever remained of their humanity. The Tahitian men rose against their captors. Knives flashed in the dark. Fires lit the jungle like hell itself had come to collect its debt. By the time the smoke cleared, only a handful of souls remained, women, children, and the scars of everything the men had done. Maimiti became their anchor. Where others wept, she built. She taught the children to fish, to plant, to listen to the wind for warnings. Her eyes carried the sorrow of Tahiti and the haunted wisdom of the mutineers. A bridge between two worlds that had both abandoned her. The little ones called her Mama Pitcairn, and in her arms, the next generation of a cursed bloodline learned to survive. At night, when the children slept, Maimiti would sit near the cliffs and speak to Fletcher's ghost. She asked him if he was proud, if the blood he spilled was worth the peace he'd promised. No answer ever came, only the same endless rhythm of waves breaking against the rocks. In that rhythm, she heard everything. The mutiny, the murder, the love, the curse. And yet, life began again. Her sons and daughters would grow to marry among themselves, their blood mingling, their lineage tightening like vines around a dying tree. From her womb came the beginning of a people, part British, part Tahitian, part damned. The island that killed her husband became her inheritance, and her prison. The world forgot about Pitcairn for a time, but the children of Maimiti Christian did not forget her. They would carry her name across centuries, to Norfolk, to the ends of the Pacific, and still the curse of isolation followed them. Every family tree has roots that twist through darkness, but hers Hers grew from a grave. Years passed on Pitcairn, and from the ashes of mutiny, life began again, strange, fragile, and bound by blood. Maimiti watched her children grow in a world untouched by law or civilization. There were no kings, no priests, no books to tell them right from wrong, only memory and instinct, and the heavy silence of an island that remembered too much. Her sons bore the faces of two worlds, the pale eyes of England and the dark skin of Tahiti. Her daughters, graceful yet haunted, carried both the beauty of the Pacific and the sorrow of their father's rebellion. And as the seasons turned, the island began to fold inward. The same names filled every cradle, the same blood filled every vein. On Pitcairn, there were no strangers, only reflections of the same cursed beginning. Maimiti saw it before anyone else, the closeness, the repetition of faces, the echo of one voice in another. The island was too small to escape itself. What had begun as survival, unions born of loneliness and necessity, became something darker, a bloodline turning inward, circling like a serpent that devours its own tail. Still, she did not speak against it. How could she? There was no one else. The sea stretched too far, and the outside world had long forgotten them. Each generation was a reflection of the first sin, a living echo of Fletcher's mutiny, sealed in flesh. The Christian name spread through the island like wild grass, binding every family, every face, every secret together. By the time Maimiti's hair had turned white, the island was ruled by her descendants. Children played where blood had once been spilled. The graves of the mutineers were covered in vines, their crimes buried under the roots of the next generation. And yet, the curse lingered, not in ghosts or superstition, but in the blood itself. From Maimiti's womb had come a dynasty, one that would survive storms, famine, and isolation, but not purity. The same blood that bound them together also trapped them in a cycle, love, violence, and shame repeating like the tides. In that isolation, identity began to blur. Where did the Englishman end and the islander begin? What separated family from stranger, ancestor from child? They were all of one origin now, all children of the same doomed paradise. And through it all, Maimiti endured. She lived to see her grandchildren's faces, each one a shadow of the man she had once loved. Each one proof that even after death, Fletcher Christian's rebellion still lived, not in ships or guns, but in blood and bone. They say blood remembers, that no matter how far a family drifts, its sins will surface again, in a voice, in a name, in the hollow echo of a story retold. So, I'll ask you, if a family is born from sin but survives by love, is it cursed or chosen? The sea had always been both a promise and a punishment for Maimiti's bloodline. It brought her husband once, a mutineer seeking freedom, and it would carry her descendants away, chasing that same illusion. When the time came to leave Pitcairn, it wasn't a voyage of adventure, it was exile. The island that had once been paradise was dying, stripped of soil, swallowed by hunger, haunted by too many graves. For generations, the Christians had lived on that black volcanic rock, cut off from the world that had damned them. But the blood had thinned and twisted. Brothers married cousins, cousins bore sons who carried the same names, the same eyes, the same quiet madness. The soil could no longer feed them, and the blood could no longer sustain them. So they looked once more to the sea, to escape the prison their ancestors had built. In 1856, the British Crown sent a ship, the Matriarch, to move the entire Pitcairn colony to Norfolk Island, hundreds of miles west. They called it Mercy, but mercy has a cruel face when it wears the mask of empire. 194 souls, the children of Maimiti Christian, climbed aboard that ship, carrying with them not gold or goods, but the ghosts of their ancestors. Each family bore a name carved from the sins of the Bounty. Christian, Young, Quintal, McCoy, names born from mutiny and sealed by blood. As the ship left Pitcairn behind, the island shrank into mist, a speck of memory disappearing beneath the horizon. For the first time, the descendants of the mutineers were going back into the world, but they didn't belong to it anymore. They were no longer English, and not quite Polynesian. They were something in between, a people born from exile, forever adrift between shame and survival. When they reached Norfolk, the land rose before them like a dark emerald, lush, alive, untamed. To some, it looked like a second chance. To others, it looked like the same curse with greener trees. Maimiti was long gone by then, but her blood walked ashore that day, carried in the eyes of children who would never know her name, in the hearts of mothers who still sang her songs beneath the palms. Her descendants built homes, churches, and graves on Norfolk soil, but even there, the shadow of Pitcairn followed. The same names intermarried, the same whispers of sin and bloodline continued, generation after generation, as if the ocean itself could not wash it clean. They say the ghosts of Pitcairn sailed with them, that when the wind howls through the Norfolk pines, you can hear the mutineers still arguing, the women still weeping, and the sea still keeping score. So, tell me, when a family tries to outrun its past, does the curse die with the island, or does it sail with them to shore? They say Maimiti Christian never left the islands. Not truly. Her body may have returned to the earth long ago, but her blood still walks beneath the same sky, in the eyes of children who have never heard her name, in the laughter of families who carry her sin without knowing its shape. From one woman came a lineage that spread across oceans, from the black cliffs of Pitcairn to the green shores of Norfolk, a bloodline that began with rebellion, sealed in exile, and multiplied until her descendants numbered in the thousands. Yet no one remembers the Tahitian girl she once was, only the shadow of the man she followed into oblivion. Maimiti was the silent foundation beneath the myth of Fletcher Christian, the mother who carried his children through chaos and hunger, who buried him with her bare hands and built a new world on the ashes of the old. Every Christian, Young, McCoy, or Quintal who lives today is a fragment of her, a strand of the same bloodline woven by loss and endurance. But this legacy, it's not a triumph, it's a haunting. For generations, the children of Maimiti have lived with what can't be undone. On Pitcairn, the isolation became a circle that tightened over centuries, a community so small that bloodlines folded inward, family became family again, the names repeated, John, Mary, Matthew, Thursday, faces mirrored faces. By the time the modern world found them, the island had become a reflection of its own beginning, a paradise born from sin, still paying its price in silence. Today, on Norfolk Island and beyond, thousands still trace their roots back to her. Some speak with pride, others with unease, as if the blood itself remembers. Because what started with love and defiance became a legacy steeped in guilt, secrecy, and survival. The story of the Bounty wasn't just a mutiny of men, it was the making of a matriarch, Maimiti Christian, daughter of Tahiti, wife of a rebel, and mother of 1,000 faces. Her children carry both paradise and punishment in their veins, a reminder that every family, no matter how far removed, has a buried story. And sometimes that story stares back from the mirror. So, I'll ask you, how much of your own blood do you really know? What forgotten faces sleep behind your name? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to Underbelly Bloodline, where we uncover the ghosts within the family tree and the mothers whose stories were written in silence, but never erased.